Hello, everyone. This is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of Cruel and Beautiful, I, the Dragon, Rabbit Hole, and King Dio. With the recent release of Skyward Sword HD on Nintendo Switch, there's been a lot of Pretendo circle jerking on message boards and things of that nature, and a lot of it. You're seeing a lot of like the old arguments against the Wii. This idea that like it had game droughts, which is nonsense. But I think most prominently, at the moment anyway, is that people are still trying to pretend that Skyward Sword was a bad game. Um, this has kind of been. I think Skyward Sword kind of marked the beginning of like the modern sort of Pretendo mindset. Because I don't remember like games before that really getting like reviled and getting attacked in the same way, in this particular way, where game journalists, legit pretended that they couldn't control the game, that it was so broken that they couldn't figure out how to play it. It was so unintuitive. It was so uninspired. Like, why can't we just use buttons? Like, rather than like learn how to play the fucking game journalists chose to whine and cry about things that really don't matter. I heard bitching about the visuals. I heard bitching about like the linearity, like the level design and stuff like that. I heard complaints about um, side quests and stuff like that. The way the sky was designed, general item usage, stuff like that. There was a lot of like weird complaints thrown at Skyward Sword in particular, like that didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. This was actually one of the best Zelda games I think I had played in a long, long time. I much preferred it to Skyward Sword, Twilight Princess, Phantom Hourglass, and Spirit Tracks, which I really liked actually. I thought it was a huge improvement, like with vast like creative areas that you can explore, with well-designed puzzles, with interesting items, and I think above all else, like interesting swordplay, combat, and boss fights. I really enjoyed this game from start to finish. Like I've played it a couple of times, and I just adore it. Like I've always stood by this game as an absolute masterpiece in the Zelda legacy. Probably, I don't want to say it's my top five anymore because I think Breath of the Wild might eclipse it. I'm still playing through all the Zelda games again. Breath of the Wild was so good that I have no idea where like any of my placements are. Like, is Ocarina still better than Breath of the Wild? All this, A Link to the Past better than Ocarina? Like, is Majora's Mask up there? Like, I have no idea. Like, I have no idea what my Zelda game ranking is right now. But like, to say that like I didn't enjoy Skyward Sword would be like a disservice. That would be dishonest. I would be straight up lying to you. And I think that's because, like, I actually played it. I feel like Skyward Sword kind of suffers the same problem that, like, Star Fox Zero did, in which a group of people with an agenda are trying to come into a community and try to pretend that a certain game is bad in order to push their agenda. Right, so in Star Fox Zero's case, it was like, oh, the Wii U is dead. Miyamoto fucked this up. Miyamoto's a failure. Motion controls don't work. And with the Wii, with Skyward Sword, it was a lot of the same things, a lot of the same arguments. Motion controls don't work. They do. Like, the game isn't good. It is. Like, you get the impression, like, seeing these people bitch, whine, and complain that, like, they never actually played it. And I stand like. That seems to be the case with like most major Nintendo franchises. Metroid Dread, I think, is getting a lot of the same complaints from certain people about how it like looks cartoony or looks like a 3DS game from people who haven't played it yet. People who haven't even seen the footage yet, I think. Like, Tropical Freeze got shit on for being like a 2D Donkey Kong game, right? Like, I remember people coming out and saying, like, oh man, this is nowhere near as ambitious or interesting as No Man's Sky, which is, of course, ridiculous. No Man's Sky was a complete joke. It always will be. Fucking retards. Like, we're kind of at the point now, I think, where we really need to disregard criticism lobbied at Nintendo titles, because so much of it is just complete nonsense. So much of it, like, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So much of it, like, doesn't really matter to the actual audience. Like, half the time, like, whenever I see someone complaining about Nintendo, it's someone who doesn't even own a fucking Nintendo console, who has no idea what's on the console, who has no idea how these controls work, or, like, how to use them, or how they influence the game design, or how they make them better. Like, it just... they're completely ignorant, like, to put it very, very simply. And that ignorance sort of leads them to these ridiculous claims, like Star Fox Zero is completely unplayable because of the gamepad controls. Skyward Sword is completely broken because of the Wii Remote, because of the Joy-Cons. Like, you see people just exaggerate these kind of these minor grievances with these games, or make up flaws with the game in question, and just, like, parrot them around as if they're fact all the time. Like, Skyward Sword, I think, is kind of in an interesting position where I don't think they'll be able to continue the narrative with this release, because it conflicts with, like, the complaints about Breath of the Wild, right? What was the big complaint about Breath of the Wild? Oh, the dungeons aren't good, which is true, but it's completely disingenuous, and, like, doesn't give any credit at all to what the game does really, really well, which is the open environments. Skyward Sword is kind of the opposite, where, like, the environment itself isn't that great, but the dungeons and, like, the level design are top tier. Like, way, way better than Breath of the Wild. Anything in Breath of the Wild. Like, how are you going to justify, like, going back and forth complaining about that kind of stuff? How are you going to justify complaining about motion controls when, like, you have an alternative button layout now? Like, how are you going to continue complaining about, like, item menus when, like, they're a lot more intuitive, when they've adjusted Phi, when they've made, like, minor adjustments like that? Like, are you really going to continue acting as if Skyward Sword is the worst Zelda ever, as some retards like Mr. Medicare like to say? No, there's no justifying that. There was never any justifying that. Like, Skyward Sword was phenomenal, and I think, like, 10 years later, it holds up incredibly well, and I'm sure that there are already a lot of people who are deeply invested in this adventure, deeply invested in what's going on, and deeply invested to see how it ends. Like, they're going to be playing it until the very bitter end, and they are going to enjoy it. I do think they will. I think the game is spectacular. It deserves a lot more attention and praise. Not only is it going to be, like, liked among the audience, I think it's going to be popular. I think it's going to sell really, really well. At least as much as, like, Link's Awakening Remake did. That sold, like, what, like 4 million copies? I could see this doing about that much, if not a little bit more, because it's a 3D game. Like, that's big, right? That's really good for a remaster like this. I think the game is just going to win over more and more fans, because when you get right down to it, your complaints don't affect the quality of the game in the slightest. They're always going to be good, they're always going to be remembered, and they're always going to win over new fans. No matter how much you bitch, whine, and complain on 4chan or YouTube or any of these other platforms, it's never going to change the fact that Zelda is the best video game franchise in the world.